Alright, hello guys, welcome back, or if it's your first time coming, welcome. I am the Philadelphia Whovian, and for this video, it's actually just going to be a kind of a talk. I just felt like talking about Tom Baker and his time as the Fourth Doctor. Now, with Tom Baker, for those of you who watch Classic Who, he is the definitive Doctor, for many reasons. One, you could argue very successfully, his era had such a long combination of very good episodes, as well as the fact that his time as the Doctor was one of the longest times, not one of them, probably the longest time that an actor has played the Doctor. As a result, he was iconic to many people, and let's not forget that incredible outfit that the Fourth Doctor had, the scarf. Oh, that scarf. What also makes his outfit amazing for me is the fact that his outfit changes more often than people give credit for. If you go and watch his entire run, the Fourth Doctor, he always has a scarf. And even the scarf changes, I believe, in like his last or second to last season. But it's only the scarf, the idea of a scarf. That's what stays with him. His jackets change. His, pants change. His shirts change. The vest change. His boots will change on him. It all depends on, what season or what episode. It can change within a season. And I like that a lot with him. But before I go into the outfit, which I already kind of got into, this video is not only just going to be a general talk about Tom Baker's time as the Doctor, it's mostly going to be just a talk about Tom Baker as the Doctor and what happened in the background of his time as the Doctor. Because what happens with Tom Baker is that I think people with him, either they don't know much about Tom Baker, they just know his time as the Doctor, or they kind of just know about his ending time as the Doctor. What I mean by that is, people know that he was quite difficult to work with. Tom Baker played the Doctor for 7 years. So I'm just going to give a general, talk about each year he played the Doctor and each season he was a Doctor and how his personality and his, his mood and his ways of being kind of changed over the process of his time as the Doctor. Being in any environment for 7 years and being an actor in an environment for 7 years can lead to two things happening. One, you become so comfortable in the role that you become so at ease that you're always nice all the time because you're so able to just, go back and forth very easily, or it leads to being so into the role, so immersed in the role, that you have such an authority over the role that you get very impatient. You begin to lose your patience over time because you have such a concept of what this character is that you become protective of it and you own it very intensely. There are other, methods and, steps a person could take when they're involved in something like that for so long, especially something like Doctor Who, which does have high stress levels. But I'm going to start from his time he took over as a Doctor from 1974. That's when the world first saw Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. Alright, so what has to be remembered about his run is it wasn't like he became the Doctor and then a whole year went by before we finally saw him since Jon Pertwee. Not really. Jon Pertwee, his last episode was in the midst of 1974. And then Tom Baker began his time as the Doctor. We first not just see him as, his regeneration when he goes from Jon Pertwee to Tom Baker, but his actual take on the Doctor. His very first episode was in December of 1974. And this was the episode of Robot. His very first episode. Now, what also is kind of change for the Tom Baker era was a change of producers. We had Barry Letts, who was at the end of the Pertwee era, the third Dr. Jon Pertwee era. Now we have taking over for him is Philip Hinchcliffe. Oh god, I think I pronounced it wrong. I think Hinchcliffe. Making sure I got that right. Yep. Go his Hinchcliffe. Now, what has to be understood though is that Hinchcliffe had good luck on his side. What I mean by that is, Barry Letts was the previous producer. Well, rather than Barry Letts just leaving abruptly and then Philip just coming in and taking over for something he didn't fully understand, Barry Letts stayed on for a while so Philip Hinchcliffe could come in and shadow him for a lot longer than he expected. This gave I think personally it shows in the actual production of the episodes that came out, especially in the first season of the Tom Baker era. You get a producer who had a solid idea of what he wanted to do, but he also clearly was comfortable with what he was doing. It wasn't like, oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing, and I have no grasp on what I'm doing. No, he came in and shadowed Barry Letts, and Barry Letts even stayed on for Robot. And I think by the time we hit the genesis of the Daleks, that's what maybe even Ark in Space, that's when Philip Hinchcliffe really took over as the head producer. So we have Tom Baker in the role as the Doctor. Now, Tom Baker, like many great casting choices, was not the first choice for the Doctor. There were quite a few other casting choices for the Doctor before eventually they just luckily enough or fortunately enough, came upon Tom Baker. And Tom Baker was really familiar with the Patrick Troughton era, but his attention to Doctor Who waned during the Pertwee era, so he wasn't really that knowledgeable about the Pertwee era. He knew that John Pertwee was playing the Doctor, but he didn't follow Doctor Who that closely, which probably gave a very marked way on how he played the character. He didn't come in having watched, Pertwee and saying, oh, I gotta do just that. No, he came into the character and was able to really make the character kind of his own, because he didn't have too much of a prior knowledge of the previous Doctor that much. And with Tom Baker, when the producer finally saw him and said, oh, he would be a good choice to play the Doctor, what really sold Tom Baker was he was just so eccentric. And that's the thing about Tom Baker. Like John Pertwee, even though he didn't see John Pertwee that much, Tom Baker and John Pertwee were known for throwing a lot of who they naturally were into the role of the Doctor. It was Patrick Troughton who was mostly known for really building a whole different persona than his own actual, personality when it came to the portrayal of the Doctor. But Tom Baker really poured a lot of himself into it, and you can see that Tom Baker poured a lot of himself into it. I noticed that when I finally saw my very first interview of Tom Baker, which I think took place during Revenge of the Cybermen, the last episode of his very first season. The reason why I'm going to assume is definitely Revenge of the Cybermen in that interview was because the interview was really like in a quarry area and there were Cybermen everywhere. So clearly the interview had to been during Revenge of the Cybermen. That was my very first time not my first time seeing a Tom Baker interview, because I've seen interviews with him as he's older. My first time seeing an interview when he was younger. That's what I mean. And you see in that interview that Tom Baker, really did pour a lot of who he naturally was into the role of the Doctor. And he just had a natural, eccentric way about him. His eyes were expressive. They could bulge out of his face very easily. And he had a very enigmatic smile that in his face was very expressive, but also, like many of the other Doctors, very dynamic. It could go from very comedic, very lighthearted, to serious and kind of tragic in a very quick fell swoop. And that's a difficult thing for an actor to do. To go through a range of emotions in one scene is not an easy feat. It's just not. Not by a long stretch. So, the first season of the Fourth Doctor, the ones I have from his very first season, I luckily have all but one, and I've seen all but one. I've got Robot, conveniently got a cheap price one day, then the Ark in Space, which wonderfully is always at a cheap price. Thank you for always being at a cheap price. Thank you so much. Then the Centauran Experiment, and then Genesis of the Daleks, which I also conveniently got for a nice cheap price too. Now, what we also know about his era is that Philip Hinchcliffe had while it was definitely, the first season kept up with, the continuity of, the style, not style, but more so the dedication, effort, and, sorry, my laptop's rocking. My cat's on top of the thing. Honey, you got to move. I love you. I do. And the world loves you too. Look how beautiful he is. Yes, he is. But honey, don't try and jump on top of the computer. I saw you about to do that. Thank you. Look, I do love him though. I love him tremendously. But Philip Hinchcliffe definitely wanted to put his own stamp on when it came to the concept of, the Doctor Who. He wanted to have a different style to how he approached it. And he did, and yeah, that's my cat dropping things right behind the laptop. I love him, but he can be a klutz. Sorry about that. So, when it comes to this, Full's first season, you do see a slight change of look and concept and style behind the first season of the Fourth Doctor versus the last season of the Third Doctor. This is very true. And this eventually will come into controversy under, I believe her name was Mary Whitehouse, who is a part of the National Viewers Association, Viewers and Listeners Association, when it came to film. But I'll get into that later, because that's when the true drama begins to happen. But in the first season, they really wanted to grab, get audiences really interested, so they realized it'd be a really good idea to have the Daleks and Cybermen appear again in the Fourth Doctor's first season to really, get fans hooked onto it. Hence why we have Genesis of the Daleks and why we have also Revenge of the Cybermen, whether you like Revenge of the Cybermen or not. Now you can see the effort behind why it was in the first season. Alright, so Tom Baker throughout all this. Now Tom Baker had a very interesting history. I think unless I was completely the wrong information was given online, Tom Baker was about 15 years old before he entered a monastery or a monastic sort of education, and he was there for about 6 years before he finally left it. And so yes, he's a bit of a Roman Catholic background to him. Now, with him, he did a lot of odds and end jobs, and maybe even probably did the military for a bit before he finally got into acting, and he definitely did do some roles which gave him a very good amount of range. And then before he finally got into the role of the Doctor. And he described that when he did first came to the scene as the Doctor, he went from being an unknown actor to being a complete fame just hit him overnight, and it was absolutely incredible. What was wonderful about Tom Baker was he wasn't one of those people who's like, oh, well, all of a sudden my privacy is being invaded. I can't believe it. God, it's so annoying. He understood that fame came with the territory. Not only that, but he was not even that upset about it. Not only not upset about it, he even was fine with it, because he's like, I'd rather be famous and have, be financially secure and all that than, have a private life and, be wondering what's going to happen with my life from week to week. I'm paraphrasing his, general outlook on the situation, but that's what he really felt like coming into the role. He dealt with the fame relatively easily, and he just stepped into it gracefully. Now, when it came to his outfit, oh dear Lord, that costume. Yes, that costume that was chosen, the scarf. Okay, here's what I was told. I was told that the yarn was given to a woman to make a scarf for the Fourth Doctor, and she used all the yarn. I don't think anyone told her to use all the yarn, but she did. She used all the yarn, and that's why you have that super long scarf, which has become iconic with the Fourth Doctor. And Tom Baker was said to be absolutely fabulous when it came to this scarf. He really was, because, I think it was Elizabeth Sladen who said it. She's like, if I had to wear a scarf that long, and it got in my way all the time, I'd be like, well, that scarf is getting in my way. But Tom Baker just dealt with it. He even used it to pull things. Like, he just made the scarf his own. And you see that very early on in his time as the Doctor. And Tom Baker, no matter what time of, when it comes to his time as the Doctor, no matter what time you ever catch him in, Tom Baker was very honest about things. And one thing that Tom Baker was honest about was the fact that he admitted that when he first took on the role as the Doctor, the producers gave him some leeway and some slack on how to play the Doctor, because they assumed, he really had a good lid on it. But truth is, he admitted he had absolutely no idea what he was doing when he first took the role as the Doctor. And I like hearing that. I like hearing that he's like, oh, I just came in and just went with it, rolled with it. And he did roll with it. And he had that, devil-may-care attitude that really helped him. And when you hear about his first season, you hear a lot of good things about Tom Baker. Because here's the thing. Elizabeth Sladen, she stayed on to play Sarah Jane Smith. And she was with John Pertwee for about a year. as his companion. Now, John Pertwee left after, she was there with him for that one, season, because between, Barry Letts was leaving, who was the producer before, and then also Joe Grant by Katie Manning, she had left the year before, and things were just changing on him. So the fact that even though he liked Elizabeth Sladen, and she and John Pertwee got along fine. They did. They got along fine. It just was the fact that there was just too much change for him. And again, Barry Letts was leaving. So John's like, yeah, it's time for me to just head on out. Now, Tom Baker came in, and Elizabeth Sladen said, if she wasn't, sugarcoating the concept, she said she absolutely liked Tom Baker's take on the Doctor and his work method. Because Tom Baker was very, improvisational. He was, experimental. And he did things in a style that she really felt comfortable with. So she didn't hate John or anything. She liked John, but she admitted she got on better with Tom Baker as the Doctor. Now, what also makes his time as the Doctor more incredible is his initial companions. Elizabeth Sladen stayed on as Sarah Jane Smith, yes. Very much so. We see that in, Robot. But also, what's funny is the companion was chosen before the Doctor was chosen. And we get another companion as Harry Sullivan, played by Ian Marter. And I did not put him in my top 10 or honorable mentions of my top 10 companions. It's because, sadly, I forgot about him. I don't know why I did. My bad. I'm sorry. I love Harry Sullivan. I think he was a great, great, great companion. He was great. But here's the funny thing about him. He was hired before they even had an actor to play the Doctor. And the reason why Harry Sullivan, played by Ian Marter, was hired was because they were thinking they were going to end up with another really old actor to play the Doctor. So they were going to naturally need a younger guy, a youthful guy, to probably do some of the fighting, or heavy lifting, or some of that stuff. The action-packed stuff. So that's why you have Harry Sullivan. You had someone the Doctor, who was going to kind of not be like an Ian, an Ian from, the very first Doctor's era. Not exactly like that, but very similar to that. Were served that sort of purpose. But they hired Tom Baker, an actor who could do all these things already. He could do his own fight sequences, etc. and so forth. He could do the action, he could do the running and the energy. He had all that because he was a younger Doctor than the previous ones. So that made Harry Sullivan a kind of redundant in some ways as the Doctor, even though I personally loved him, and I, was happy they brought him back because he actually played a different character in the Third Doctor era in the Carnival of Monsters. He was brought back to play a companion. I liked him, but the fact is he was considered quite redundant, which is why you see him another reason why you see him kind of leave in the beginning of the Fourth Doctor's second season. Now, the first season of his time as the Doctor was not without its mishaps, the Fourth Doctor. The Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, actually got injured when he was filming the Centauran experiment and could not even film his own fight sequence, I believe, with the Centauran. Yes, I think what happened was he was playing with a yo-yo on a cliff and there was an accident. I could be wrong, that could always not be it, but I know that he definitely said that, Tom Baker said, yeah, that's what you get for playing with a yo-yo on a cliff, so I'm going to assume he was referring to the accident. This will not be the first time, this will definitely not be the first time, that the Fourth Doctor has an accident on set. But yes, so, 1974 into 75, you've got 5, stories that ended up being hailed as very good. Then we have his second season. Now, this is a season that is celebrated by many Whovians who love classic Who. This hails being the season that is like, whoa, this really upped the game and also really showed the themes and the styles of their producers and the writers of the time. You see, the Philip Hinchcliffe era was a time that was devoted to, fantasy, or in science fiction. It was really aimed in that direction. Hence why you have themes or elements that are stuff like Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein, or maybe not Jekyll and Hyde per se, mostly just Frankenstein. But also, there was homage. That's another thing that happens, and I like that the classic Who writers admit. There was, I don't know if can't remember if it was Tom Baker, but I think it was Tom Baker who definitely made some connection to this. And he said, it's like a fine line between homage and plagiarism. That's the theme of what all the people were saying at that time. I think Tom Baker also added to that. And he said, yes, there was some, like, just general, like, taking ideas and elements from, other things and just, putting them into Doctor Who. Well, that's nothing new. There's really nothing new there. But, it really said there's a fine line between homage and plagiarism. And you see it in stuff like Robot, which you could say just completely comes from the concept of King Kong. And it does. It really does. It was clearly heavily inspired by King Kong. Even with Sarah Jane Smith being carried by the robot and sympathizing with her because she sympathized with him. It's very much King Kong stuff. But then you have things like Terror of the Zygons. But after that, you have the episode Planet of Evil, which was heavily inspired by The Forbidden Planet, which I can't remember if that was a movie or a TV show that came out during the exact same time before it, but Planet of Evil was clearly, I think even when the producer said that they're felt a little bad because it's maybe a little bit too much of a ripoff of Forbidden Planet, but who knows. And then you've got the android invasion. Oh, sorry, not android. The Pyramids of Mars, which hails being an iconic thing. But again, back to this, fairy tale fantasy, folklore, and, mythology that was really running rampant during the Hinchcliffe era. That was the themes they were going for. Then you have the android invasion, which is Terry Nation kind of separating himself or just, going different than just doing Dalek stories, which he embraced very well. Now, this story, well, it's got some, slight weaknesses in it, and this has also happened to Tom Baker. Tom Baker got sick during this when he swallowed some very bad water when he had to hide underwater for a brief time so he didn't get caught by the android. So, another time where Tom Baker got sick. Yes, but Elizabeth Slade and him were still going very strong together, and again, he was known for being very amusing on set, or he was very energetic. Tom Baker was said to be very lighthearted, and of course he had his tragic moments or his darker moments, but he overall, still in the first 2 years of his run, he may have had his temperamental moments, but quite a few doctors had their temperamental moments, but nothing to the point where he was ever, annoying or vexing to, the people in the background. He was still said to be a generally good guy, Tom Baker. And then you got the brain of Morbius. Again, the Frankenstein concept, it does have it. And this has some contention to it, because Terrence Dicks may have written this story initially, but there were some changes that want to be done to it, but he went on holiday, and so Robert Holmes had to kind of rewrite the thing all over again just to make things financially easier. Because there was a robot there initially instead of where the guy who serves Morbius, there was supposed to be a robot who looked after him, but that was just too financially expensive, so the whole idea had to be changed and all that sort of and whatnot. But again, you see Tom Baker really at at his peak, or really in his element. But you see him more at his element in Brain of Morbius, as well as Android Invasion, than you do Pyramids of Mars. Now, Pyramids of Mars, it shows in Tom Baker's performance, slightly, you could argue it does show in his performance, that he was not altogether happy with the director. And he wasn't. It was a woman, I think, named Patty, and he was not overall happy with her at all. They really butted heads. And you could argue that it does show in Pyramids of Mars. So we do have him, being at odds and being temperamental with the director. But he's still overall not hailed as a bad guy. He's overall still liked on set. Then you've got the Seeds of Doom. Ooh, yes, great episode. But again, giving homage back to other things were happening on television and the BBC at that time. The idea of, killer plants, and pods and all that. That was, working with the environment around you and, getting inspiration from the world around you at that time. And Doctor Who was really doing that. But as with the first season, same with the second season of the Tom Baker era, which was they were coming under fire. The Philip Hinchcliffe era was coming under fire for being a little too violent and neglecting or forgetting its child audience in some ways. It was getting a little too dark, they said, and it kind of shows how controversy in some way, shape, or form has almost always bogged down Doctor Who, or Doctor Who's always had to deal with some type of, issues, or being attacked in some way from, like, critics, from, viewers, etc., and so forth. It's something that's always, in some way, shape, or form, kind of been attached to Doctor Who. So it's nothing new. When it comes to New Who, this is nothing new. It's always been happening, and it's always been happening during that era. People often forget about it now, nowadays, but it was still occurring at that time. So, now we have the Doctor's next season. This is around the time that Elizabeth Sladen made it very clear she was finally going to be leaving Doctor Who. But the producers were convinced Elizabeth Sladen to stay on for a couple episodes to get the season started. Then it was going to, move on to another companion. So you have the Mask of Mandragora. And then the one I don't have, the Hand of Fear. And this is where Tom Baker's interesting choices begin to show. See, Tom Baker, throughout his time as the Doctor, would give suggestions as leading man would. But like many leading men and women, or, something, or like many producers or directors, etc. and so forth, not all those ideas were always the best. They just weren't. And his idea began with the Deadly Assassin. Now, the Deadly Assassin was written by Robert Holmes, and this is a story that at the time, while it had a high viewership, it was not that highly regarded, and this is where the controversy even sparked even higher. But what I'm talking about with Tom Baker, because I want to focus mostly on Tom Baker and his views on these things, is that Tom Baker, after Elizabeth Sladen left, Tom Baker even thought that it would be a good idea for him to have no companion. He didn't need a companion. He said, I can just talk to myself. Yeah, he literally said to Philip, he's like, no, I don't need a companion for the rest of the season. No, I can do things all by myself. And Tom Baker nowadays even freely admits that that is a preposterous idea. And he's happy that the director and producer also thought that was a preposterous idea. They did. But then you got the Deadly Assassin, and this is when the controversy begins, because the National Viewer and Listener Association, headed up by Mary Whitehouse, I believe, who was like, a Christian who was really, really disturbed with how Doctor Who had gotten even more violent than it usually was, because in, I believe, the third episode of the story, The Deadly Assassin, you see the Doctor, he's actually being not only kind of strangled, but he's also being drowned to death by the corrupt Time Lord. Yeah, you see this happen, and it shows the Doctor underwater as he's possibly drowning. And this just took her too far. And for me personally, I was like, we've seen people die before on Doctor Who, plenty of times. And I think it was even Philip Hinchcliffe himself who said, with her, she wasn't really concerned about the body count, but I guess how it was presented. And you see her speaking where she said, okay, they were not aware, Mary Whitehouse says this, they were not really very well aware about the effect this was having on children. But Philip Hinchcliffe believes to this very day that I never really thought it was not only a big deal, he thought they had never gone too far. And I see what he means. Because, again, looking at the history of, Doctor Who up until that point and the history afterwards when it comes to the show, the last image of the Doctor possibly, drowning after being killed, it's just not that shocking to me because I know of the history of the show. And it's like, well, for me, when I think about Mary Whitehouse, it's like, what show were you watching that you didn't notice that, people have died before? But it's more so like it's the presentation of the death. So this one, Doctor Who really was coming under fire from this association. And this is at the time where it was best decided that Philip Hinchcliffe should be, redistributed or put somewhere else. I think he eventually went to a show called Target on the BBC. Sorry if I got the show wrong with that one. And eventually he would be replaced by Graham Williams. Yeah, but he stayed on for a little while before Graham Williams finally did come in. So there's that. And then we have the new campaign after the Deadly Assassin, which was the campaign of Leela. And if my memory serves me correctly, she was invented by Robert Holmes and played by Louise Jameson. And the face of evil is the first time we see her. We did. So, then it's Face of Evil, then he thinks that the invisible enemy, and then I believe it's Robots of Death, I believe, also. And then there's the Talons of Wen Chiang. Which, by the way, guys, I just want to let you all know, I finally purchased my copy of Wen Chiang. It's coming in the mail very soon. Yes, I now am going to own the Talons of Wen Chiang. Heard great things about it, and that might even be what inspired me to do this video today. The fact that I finally purchased Wen Chiang. Maybe that might have influenced my decision to do this video. Who knows? Who knows? And this is where we first begin to hear issues of Tom Baker when it comes to his companion, which was, again, was Louise Jameson. And she even confronts in the very next season, in the episode The Sunmakers, you see her in an interview where she talks about how Robert Holmes was smart and he separated her from Tom Baker because their time together was fraught. I mean, they argued very often, she said. Nowadays, they get along perfectly fine, but at the time, they definitely fought with each other. So you see Tom Baker really beginning to possibly become difficult to work with when it comes to his companion. I don't know if they disagreed all the time. They probably had some good times, but they probably definitely did have some arguments with each other. Now, at this point, this is when Tom Baker begins to become very honest with himself. When you see him talk about interviews now, sorry, I've been talking so long, so I want to get some water. Oh, that feels good. Great water. Now, Tom Baker was known for having some very strong opinions about his take on the Doctor, but not just that, he had strong opinions on the scripts themselves. Yes. And you actually saw this in Robots of Death. As a matter of fact, screenwriters were warned that when they came in to do the first reading of their scripts, where the actors did a read-through of their scripts, and they were there for the first time, producers would sometimes warn them. He says, just don't take any... Don't pay much attention to Tom Baker. When he comes in, he always says scripts are rubbish. That's what he does. Don't take it personally. So yes, Tom Baker could be a little harsh in his, comments on the scripts he was given. And it's because with Tom Baker, he says to this day, he's like, he felt that he could have written the scripts better. Now, not the plot lines, he would have been rubbish at the plot lines, but it came to the writing, he's like, the writing, it didn't capture personality, it didn't capture energy, spark, it was just, and this is one I could definitely quote, because I remember it for well, he said, the scripts were audible print. Audible print. That's what he thought the scripts were. So they lacked their personality, they just didn't speak to him, and so he didn't always get a good feel of like, what the lines were being presented as, and he also didn't like the whole, condescending middle class, like, satire, or like where the Doctor is insulting people and sometimes in certain ways. He just didn't think it was, it didn't appeal to him that much. So, he always felt that he could have written the scripts better. And I'm not insulting Tom Baker for saying this. He admits this wholeheartedly. And that's the great thing about Tom Baker. He's not in denial about the things that he was during his time as the Doctor. And he also admits nowadays that this must have been very frustrating for the writers and producers and directors to have this actor who thinks that he could do this all better. It definitely did. He's like, I can't blame them for being frustrated with him. He's like, I honestly couldn't blame them at all, because he's like, it would have been frustrating to deal with me. And then he also admitted that he was giving suggestions left and right that were just downright preposterous. He's like, it wouldn't make any sense. So, of course, they rejected my idea. But at the time, he was very much always pushing his ideas, and he just often would sometimes stray from the script. And then the director and producer had to remind him, it's like, come on, we gotta stick to the script. We gotta stick to that script, man. And, he was very vocal about things. Also, he didn't like being told what to do. Like, he would very much admit, he said, okay, of course tell me where to go because of lighting. I could understand that, but don't tell me how to hold a cup. Don't tell me, how I would walk, how I would lean. No, that's my job, and that's as the actor, to know how this would play out. Don't question why I do things. There was even one time where he said, because he raises his ear to water or to a glass of something before he drinks it, and someone commented on that, and he said, well, I'm from Gallifrey. And Gallifrey, clearly, it's, a good idea, or it's a polite manners to listen to something before you drink it. And the guy said, "Come on, what are you trying to do? You're making fun of me. That's not really the thing, is it?" Well, maybe I am making fun of you, but that's the way it is on Gallifrey. He had very strong opinions about his doctor, and those strong opinions with Tom Baker, well, when you have strong feelings about what you're doing, again, it leads to two outcomes. Becoming so passionate that you're just great to work with, or becoming so passionate that your strong opinions can rub off people in the wrong way, and you can become pushy and overbearing, and sometimes hard to work with. It just is the situation. It just is. Now, at the end of his fourth season, sorry, my cat was laying on the DVDs, got the Invasion of Time, where, and you can tell with the way this was written, Louise Jameson told the director and the producer she was leaving, but they were kind of in denial about it, and they were clearly hoping that Leela would stay, which is why you have that very tacked-on last ending where she just stays with Aldred or Andred, whatever his name is, at the very end, and there's not much build-up to it. It's very, very obvious they wanted her to stay, but Leela was happy to move on. Now, Louise Jameson. Now that she looks back on it, though, Louise Jameson admits she wishes she had stayed on. She does wish she had stayed on and continued to be Leela. So now they've got to go and find a new companion for the Fourth Doctor. And this is the only season I have all the episodes of when it comes to that season, because I was able to get it in the box set. The Keys to Time. Oh, God, it's so good. I'm clear, I love absolutely every episode in this, except for the Armageddon Factor. I just don't like it. Sorry. I just don't. Sorry, guys. No offense, writers of Armageddon Factor, but every episode in this is good, except for that one to me. So, in this one we see a new companion, but this time we see a Time Lord. This one is Romana 1, played by Mary Tamm. Now, I've heard some stories where she left because Tom Baker was just so hard to work with. From what I've seen on the interviews with this one, that wasn't the reason why she left. In fact, overall, she got along with Tom Baker very well, and she liked his style of doing things, the improv manner he did things. She was fine with it. It was mostly her take on Romana, the take on they had on Romana, where here she thought she was going to get a Time Lord, female, she's going to be the Doctor's equal, but oftentimes she's there to be saved a lot. And it was not something she really was that crazy about. Or maybe she could have left because, she's like, I did this for a year, I'm ready to go on, move on, and do something else. Either way, whatever reports I heard or rumors I heard that Mary Tamm just hated Tom Baker, I'm not sure they're really accurate. I'm not sure that they didn't get along. From what I've seen, they did get along perfectly fine, actually. And this season, The Keys to Time, is also an interesting season because I've heard from other people in the background, the Doctor, Tom Baker, was not moody or angsty throughout this season at all. It was mostly because he was quite subdued, because Tom Baker had experienced a bit of an injury. He, in his lively, charismatic, charming, kooky self, the producer at the time, and at the time this was Graham Williams, and it could be someone else, probably not the producer, but there was someone in the, staff side of it who had a dog, who they taught the dog a trick, and the trick was, the dog, you put something in your mouth, and his owner would stand up, the dog would bite the food that was on his lips, and then bite it. The dog would jump up and bite it. So, the guy showed this trick he could do with his dog, and it was charming. Well, the guy turned around, and Tom Baker said, oh, let me do this with this dog. Yeah, we've all done dumb things, and Tom Baker, he's human like the rest of us, so sometimes we do things without thinking. It didn't occur to him, hey, wait a minute, this dog is not mine. This dog, something can always go wrong here. And he put something in his mouth so the dog would jump up and bite it, and ended up biting his lips, and he was bleeding profusely. So there was the Fourth Doctor in the hospital with his lip bleeding, and there were people who saw this happen. That's how you saw it happen, but there were people who saw him enter the hospital. So there's the Doctor, who's like impervious to many things, mouth bleeding. And this led to there being a scar on his face. You add that to the makeup, that someone on the production side said they never had any problems with Tom Baker. They're like, he was always very nice, or maybe it's because he was subdued because of the injury that he sustained, and he just didn't want to talk very much. So you didn't hear that many, bad, things about him being temperamental, etc. and so forth, and all the other things you heard about him. There's that. But all things come to an end because Graham Williams, Romana 1's leaving, so we're going to get Romana 2. And what also has to be understood during the Tom Baker era, yes, it came under fire for being very violent before the Graham Williams took over, which also is strange to me because if you go back and you watch the Graham Williams time, it was still just as violent. It was. It really was just as violent. I don't know what Mary Whitehouse achieved when she was petitioning the Deadly Assassin for its violence. I don't know. Because I don't think much in Doctor Who changed after that. I don't think so. Either way, we now have Romana 2, but also, up until this point, you'll see, and during the Fourth Doctor era, a lot more feminism was, really injecting itself in society at this point. So you see quite a few women in very, the villainous roles or in lead roles. You see women really begin to, carry the torch. Or, like, pick up, more roles or more, like, iconic roles throughout his time. So you've got Destiny of the Daleks, which I believe Terry Nation came back for. Yeah, he did. Terry Nation wrote it. The only 2 episodes I have from this time is Destiny of the Daleks and The Creature from the Pit. Yeah, that's all I've got. I really want to own City of Death, and I want to say it's also Horns of Niemen and Nightmare of Eden. I want to own those, but what can you do, huh? They're just so bloody wanking expensive. It's absolute rubbish. Freaking rubbish. Plonkers who wrote that. I mean, some plonkers who budget these things. Sorry. And praise them. Either way, we get Romana 2. And this is where the real drama begins. You know why? Because we get Romana 2, played by, Lalla, oh gosh, darn, what is her name? I don't know, I'm saying it wrong. I'm totally saying it wrong. Oh, I got it right! Lalla, sorry, Lalla Ward. Now this, okay, I'm going to drink some more. This is where, oh, yeah, drama. But I kind of like this drama because I'm like, well, if Tom Baker, a much older man, can do this behavior, we people who are in our 20s and 30s, we're human. So you know what? We made mistakes like Tom Baker made, so I feel better about myself. Romana and Tom Baker, there was a lot of passion and intensity behind their relationship off camera. And it got so intense that they would be fighting each other, like literally arguing and shouting at each other in rehearsals, and they were known for sometimes, once the camera stopped filming, they would move to the other side of the rehearsal space or the other side of the studio and not be near each other. There were even some times where this transferred on film, where the Tom Baker doesn't even look at Lalla Ward. Yes, he doesn't even look at her, because they had a fight before. But as is the irony in all things, they would make up very quickly, and they would go from being completely holding each other in animosity to holding each other or hugging each other and feeling a great comfort with each other. Which, there's something to envy about a relationship like that, where you can go from angry to forgiving all in a quick span of time. And those passions ran so high and were so insane that they ended up falling madly in love with each other and eventually getting married. Much to the shock of everyone at the BBC, who all thought they were crazy, and there's even one person in the production staff who said when they announced that, he said, I'll give you guys 6 months, the marriage. And the marriage didn't last, he was close. It lasted about twice as long as that, which about 1 year. It did. Yes, but it was known for sometimes that immaturity to have been literally brought into the rehearsal space and into the studio between those two. They were known for arguing and then making up the next second. And this, while, some of the people in the production staff just got used to it, I mean, yeah, it did begin to transfer on film itself. It really did. And then it began to affect the takes that were happening. But again, there's something to be amazing about that. It's like, oh, this man, this age, acted this way. We've all been there. We've all been Tom Baker, where we didn't handle that sort of behavior very well. We were not on our best behavior at all in the slightest. And that's just the way things are. It sucks, but what can you do? We can't all, we all should be professional, but we're not always all going to be. But at this point, he was being even more like, outrageous with his demands on the script and his judgments on things. He really was. And Tom Baker was very vocal in this way, and he was known for being very difficult to work with at certain points and at certain times. And mind you, with Tom Baker's era, he spent quite a few years always saying, okay, this is my last era. And the producers or directors would just convince him to stay on for another year. When it came to this very last season, his last, I believe, 7th year as the Doctor, he did the same thing that he always does. Oh, sorry, I moved the camera. He did the same thing he's often did, where he said, guys, this is my last time. Honestly, it's my last time. And the producers did not at all argue with him. They just nodded, and it was clear they were kind of happy that he was going. And I believe at this point, the producer was John Nathan Turner. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. And I have 4 episodes from his final time. I don't have Meglos or The Leisure Hive or The Keeper of Traken, but I've got the E-Space Trilogy and Logopolis. Now, with the E-Space Trilogy, at this point, this is around the time where the engagement between Lalla Ward and Tom Baker, I think, was announced. I think it was at the time. But here's no problem. Well, it was his last season, and it began to affect Tom Baker's mood. He was suffering from anxiety, because think about it, it's his last season. He's been doing this for 7 years, and when he left the show, he had no idea what he was going to do, so there was anxiety about him leaving something. He thought he was going to drop off the face of the map. Like, there was no, and also he thought he was going to get no work, because he played the Doctor for so long. It's like, who's going to cast him as anything else? And that's a logical fear. That fear began to affect everything he did. And at this point, he had been given a new companion, I believe, with Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. And there was already a lot going against Adric from the very get-go. The writers didn't always make it the easiest on him. Also, he was a very young kid. Like, people diss Adric for being a bad actor, and I'm like, he was young. The guy was a kid. He really was, like a teenager or something. And some people in the production staff blame Matthew Waterhouse for this, while at the same time blaming the person who cast him, etc. and so forth. But there was one person, I think it was one of the fellow kids in Full Circle, the episode Full Circle, who said about Matthew Waterhouse, he's like, well, he deserved more sympathy. He really did, and he felt bad for him. And that's why I don't blame Matthew Waterhouse for not being as good an actor as Tom Baker. The guy was young. He was very young. What can you do? And it wasn't the easiest role to play. Adric wasn't. Adric really wasn't. But with this, he has Romana leaving, and Romana has a very slightly almost abrupt leaving. She kind of does. You could argue that it was built up to in some ways, but it did feel abrupt by the end, when it came to the end of Warrior's Gate. And then he's got Adric on his hands. And Matthew Waterhouse described it very well. He said, okay, when it came to Tom Baker and the tantrums he pulled, and all the, the lack of better terminology, the bitchiness he had, being a young person who wasn't exposed to much when it came to, this level of filmmaking, he said it did have an effect on him. Other actors would have just shrugged it off, say, oh, there's an actor going off his rocker again, but he said, no, it was intimidating. And the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker, it was hard sometimes. It was difficult working with him. But, and this is what Matthew Waterhouse gives him much credit on, it gives Tom Baker much credit on, he also says that Tom Baker knows this and freely admits this. And that was the great thing about Tom Baker. Tom Baker is not a fake. He admits to what he was. And that's the thing about Tom Baker. He does admit to what he was. And then eventually we get the replacement on Logopolis when Peter Davison does come in to do the Doctor. And, Tom Baker admits it was very hard. Just relinquishing it. And it took an hour for them to do his finishing scene. And you know, he was like, it was very difficult because he wasn't given a speech. He didn't have a speech. He had very few lines at that end, but when it was all said and done, he was happy with how it came out. He was. You know, it seemed to genuinely affect people. So that was his full time as the Doctor. And I'm probably missing things, and if I got something wrong, guys, could you please correct me down below? If you do watch this video, you know something I might have, you know, gotten incorrect. I'm just going by all the things I deduced from the interviews of his. So I know people know or believe that Tom Baker was always difficult throughout his run. No, he wasn't. Tom Baker, when he first came on, he was said to be great. He was said to be great to work with. Elizabeth Sladen loved working with him. I believe Mary Tam loved working with him too. I do believe so. And he said to be very charismatic, very wacky, very zany, very goofy. He was very eccentric. He was everything the Doctor needed to be. And something that someone said about him in the production side, they said why they loved him, is Tom Baker, he was great because he didn't take acting too seriously, but he also did take it seriously. It was very strange, but he had that right combination. That was absolutely magnificent. And when it comes to when in his later times when he did get very temperamental, where he was very unprofessional in the sense that he was kind of harsh to the writers of the show and didn't respect their material that much. You know, I see what he means when it comes to writing being audible print, because as a writer myself, sometimes we write things and they just don't, they're not as easy to say as if the actor was able to take was written and then do an improv version of that. I understand the impulse to improv your lines when you feel so connected to your character. You just have to you'll go mad if you don't, like, you know, express your creativity. But I also understand the production side, being very frustrated with him as well. And sometimes Tom Baker was temperamental. Sometimes he was moody. And he did affect how the day went. He did. But is it... You could argue that perhaps that would have happened with any actor playing the Doctor for that long of a time. When you play something for so long, you get so comfortable with it that you eventually sometimes do feel like you do know everything, and your voice must always be heard, and you're going to clash with people. You are. Whether... I'm not saying he's right for how he behaved, but I'm not saying he's fully wrong either. I'm saying it's just a complicated situation. I'm saying I understand why the production staff got really sick of him. I'm saying why he got sick of the show, you know, how things were done themselves. You know, I see both sides of the situation at the same time. Either way, one thing we can all agree on, wherever was going on in the production side of things, Tom Baker was the right choice for the Fourth Doctor. He really was. And that's coming from someone who hates nastiness on the sets of things. Tom Baker, I admit, was not perfect. I know he wasn't perfect. I know he had his bad moments. But boy, was he the right actor for the job. And if you go by what I've been told and what I've watched on these interviews, Tom Baker did start out a great guy. He just got more and more jaded over time, which happens to anyone when they're on something that close to something for that long and that stretch of a time. So was he a temperamental actor, or was he an actor that just simply time began to wear on him? Who knows? I can't really determine. I have to do some more digging about Tom Baker before I really make that, full decision, or I'm probably never going to make that decision. Either way, guys, I'm just sorry for this super long video, but I just feel like talking about Tom Baker. My time is Tom Baker, and hoping my DVD of The Talons of Wing Chiang will come in the mail very soon. Either way, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This long talk about Tom Baker and my love for his Doctor overall. He just, to me, was a great Doctor, and off screen, well, I can't make any full decisions yet of what he is or what he's not, because it was a complicated situation. But that is my time with the Fourth Doctor. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you feel free to subscribe down below, don't hesitate to. You'd be awesome for doing so very much. So, I'll see you guys later. Hopefully I shall. Bye, guys.